Often when a person goes missing, there is a plausible explanation. One or two possibilities that may lead to the discovery of their fate and well-being, but this proves rather difficult when discussing Roanoke Island, home of an entire colony of 115 people who all miraculously disappeared. During the 1570s and 80s, England and Spain were about to face conflict, competing to colonize the Americas. The latter had managed to settle in South and Central America, which led to, in 1578, Queen Elizabeth I sending out Humphrey Gilbert and his half-brother Walter Raleigh to attempt to colonize the eastern coast of North America. This was when the duo found Roanoke, off the coast of North Carolina, which is now known as Dare County, though Raleigh named the island Virginia in tribute to Elizabeth, who was nicknamed the Virgin Queen. This had been the site of ancient indigenous settlements for centuries, dating as far back as 8000 BC. But it was in 1584 when English feet first landed on shore. It was the following year when the historic Roanoke colony was founded by Raleigh and Governor Ralph Lane, with Sir Richard Grenville leading the entire mission. However, not long after, the colony were faced with a strong lack of supplies. The chief of another tribe called Wingina was helping them with food. However, due to the desperation for supplies, Lane led a completely unprovoked attack on his Secretan tribe, who were reportedly incredibly hostile against the English, in an attempt to try to deter local Native Americans from further assaults, resulting in Lane murdering Wingina, which now cut off their main food supply. This led to further harsh attacks by Native American tribes, resulting in Sir Francis Drake heading to their rescue and returning the colony back to England. It was on May the 5th, 1587 when Sir Richard Grenville transported a new colony over to Roanoke, arriving in July. Within the first month, the colony once again faced small attacks from nearby Native American tribes. However, on August the 25th, Governor John White was sent back to England to retrieve more supplies, such as food, tools, and more colonists, leaving behind 87 men, 17 women and 11 children, including his own daughter Eleanor White Dare, who gave birth to his granddaughter Virginia Dare on the island on August the 18th, who was the first baby to ever be born in North America to English parents. Captain Simon Fernandez fully intended to return with the supplies, but the ongoing war between England and Spain caused severe delays, and John White wasn't able to return until August 1590, 3 years after leaving. But what he discovered has puzzled the world for centuries. He initially anchored at the north end of CROATOAN Island, 50 miles south. But on August the 15th, he reported seeing some plumes of smoke coming from Roanoke. 2 days later, and he again saw fire coming from the north end of the island, and decided to row towards it. However, he didn't want to risk coming ashore, and he and his crew slept in their boats, singing songs in the hopes that the Roanoke colonists would hear them. It wasn't until the 18th when White and his crew finally entered Roanoke. They came across some fresh tracks in the sand, but the entire island was completely deserted. All 115 colonists were unaccounted for, and all of their boats were missing. The houses had been dismantled, and any item that could be easily carried was gone. Several large trunks, including 3 belonging to White himself, had been dug up and looted. All that was left behind was the word CROATOAN carved into a signpost, and crow carved into a tree. Previously, John White had made an agreement with the colonists to leave a clue behind advising of their whereabouts if they were to relocate. This clue was most likely referring to CROATOAN Island, which is now known as Hatteras Island. John White attempted to reach there twice, but both times was faced with severe storms and was unable to make it. He returned to England and passed away in 1593, having never found out what happened to his family who had remained on Roanoke Island. He always maintained hope that they had survived and decided to relocate, but they were unable to be proven dead. However, it was in 1594 when a petition was filed for White's son-in-law Anania Dare to be declared legally dead so that his son John could inherit his estate, which was granted in 1597. For years, many searches were attempted by Sir Walter Raleigh and Samuel Mace, but they were unable to land on the island due to poor weather. It was in 1603 when Bartholomew Gilbert attempted to continue looking, aiming to land at Chesapeake Bay. However, the bad weather forced him to land elsewhere, but on July the 29th, he was murdered by a group of Native Americans, and the rest of the surviving crew fled back to England without any answers. Over the years, the story died down, but it soon gained interest again in 1834 when George Bancroft published A History of the United States, describing the daughter and granddaughter of John White, now making them huge figures in American culture. The island has become somewhat of a tourist attraction, and this story led to a silent film in 1921 named The Lost Colony, continuing the mystery and ongoing speculation. Which leads us to numerous theories, the first of which that the colonists were all murdered by local Native Americans due to the previous attacks. Another bunch of colonists over in Jamestown in Virginia were the first to have reported this theory, claiming that people bearing European features were spotted in nearby Native American villages after the disappearances, and that they were massacred not long after. However, it would be one thing to hide the remains of just a few people, but 115 people have disappeared from that island with no physical evidence ever being discovered. No signs of their boats, no bodies, and nothing on Roanoke indicated a mass attack or that anybody left in a panic, and there has never been any evidence of a mass grave in that area. Our second theory is that the colony merely assimilated with a Native American tribe and weren't killed by them. There were 115 people involved, which would have been far too much for one tribe or village to take on single-handedly, so it's a possibility that they split up and joined different ones. Manteo was a Native American who travelled to and from Roanoke and England with John White, and who had actively tried to create peace between them and the English. He was the chief of the CROATOAN tribe, but was unable to control the Roanoke, though it's possible that he returned to the island and took the settlers elsewhere with him. Furthermore, John White was once captured by the Powhatan tribe, and he met with their leader Wasanaka and his brother Opa Kanako. They described to him a place called Panawiki, which consisted of men wearing European-style clothing, even producing a map of the area. White urgently sent several search parties to this location, but there were no signs of the lost colony. It wasn't until the years of 1701 to 1709 when John Lawson was exploring North Carolina and paid a visit to Hatteras Island, where he discovered evidence of European activity. He also noticed that many of the living ancestors were actually white, leading to him believing that the lost colony had assimilated with this community after their supply from John White failed to return. He also visited Roanoke, where he found the remains of a fort, some English coins, firearms, and a powder horn. And for a while, this was the final investigation on the case. In 1887, Talcott Williams discovered a Native American burial site on Roanoke, but once excavating it in 1895, nothing of significance was found. It was in 1888 when 54 of the Croatan natives petitioned for Congress for help, claiming to have been the final members of the lost colony of Roanoke. Months later, the Ethnological Bureau responded to this. Quote, "It was thought that traces of white blood could be discovered among the Indians, some among they having grey eyes. It is probable that the greater number of the colonists were killed, but it was quite in keeping with Indian usages that a greater or less number, especially women and children, should have been made captive and subsequently incorporated into the tribe." End quote. It wasn't until 1995 when Hurricane Emily hit North Carolina and uncovered a number of Native American artifacts. This led to another excavation which uncovered a gold ring, supposedly from a Kendall family in the 16th century. This is incredibly damning, as gold wasn't introduced to North America until 1799, whereas it was in England thousands of years prior, which could put English settlers in the area at the right time frame. However, after further analysis, it was concluded that the ring was actually brass and not gold, and it couldn't be proven to have belonged to the Kendall family either. Brass was found all over the east coast of the States at the time, so this evidence was deemed pretty inconclusive. However, in 2015, a search was administered on Hatteras Island, where the Croatan tribe resided all those centuries ago. They discovered some broken English bowls, the hilt of an iron rapier sword which would have been used in England during the 16th century, a writing tablet made of slate which would have been used by educated upper-class Europeans, which possibly still had the letter M written on it, as well as some aglets which were used before the 17th century to secure wool fibres. While this all supports the possibility of the colony relocating to CROATOAN Island, and it would explain the carving on the post, all other European items that were found came from around 100 years after the disappearance. Another excavation revealed glass, more writing slates, and earrings. Considering the fact that Roanoke was the only local colony that included women, this was considered strong evidence of the colonists relocating to CROATOAN. Our third theory is that they didn't relocate to CROATOAN Island and instead headed over onto the mainland. John White had drawn up his own map of the coastline, named La Virginie Pars, but it's possible that this map contained clues to their whereabouts. At the time, making maps was incredibly difficult, so if a mistake was made, they would have to cover them up with patches. As the years rolled by and technology improved, in 2012 the map was analysed to uncover what was under the patch, and it revealed a star-shaped object which many believed could have been the location of a fort on the mainland, on the western side of Albemarle Sound, where they decided to resettle. It's possible the White covered this up to try to protect their whereabouts from the Spanish, who saw Roanoke as a threat, and had even sent an expedition to try to defeat them at the time of the disappearance. Furthermore, there were also signs of the shape being drawn on top of the patch as well, suggesting that it had either faded over time or was drawn with invisible ink. This led to a search of the location on the map, where they found fragments of English Tudor pottery, some Surrey Hampshire borderware which contained some ceramics which had actually been discontinued in 1624, and some weapons, suggesting that a small group of people had lived there peacefully. However, what brings this theory crashing down is that there are absolutely no records whatsoever of any of the 115 colony members' existence after the disappearance. No stories or confirmed reports of them living peacefully or otherwise with any other tribe or colony. It wasn't until 1937 when a man was driving through the coastal area of Carolina, and he discovered a 21-pound engraved rock with a message carved into it, supposedly from Eleanor White Dare, written to her father, John. Quote, "Father, shortly after you left for England, we arrived here. Only misery and war await us. 2 years later, more than half of us are dead from illness. 4 out of 20 remain alive. A ship arrived with a message, but in a short span they fled in fear of revenge. We don't believe you. Soon after your departure, the savage spirits grew angry. A sudden attack killed all 7, including my child, Anania, in great sorrow. We buried them about 4 miles east of this river on a small hill. Their names are inscribed on the rock. Please add this as well. The savage will show this to you, and we promise to bring you great gifts. EWD." End quote. Once this was reported, many more came forward with similar findings, but they were pretty much all dismissed as hoaxes, and the original rock the only one with any kind of legitimacy. What makes the case harder to crack is that the northern shore of Roanoke Island has lost around 928 feet or 283 meters during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which likely would have destroyed any potential evidence and left it all underwater. For years there have been attempts to conduct DNA analysis to confirm descendants of the lost colony, but this has proven almost impossible due to the lack of remains to analyse. The lack of physical evidence has led to a barrage of other theories, including the lost colony being abducted by aliens, leaving nothing behind. Some even speculating that the fort on the map isn't a fort but either a spacecraft or a landing spot. And a further theory came from Andre Freeman from the Zombie Research Society, convinced that a zombie outbreak could explain the mass disappearances. Quote, "A sudden undead plague sweeping through the unprepared colony would quickly become a horrific violent feast, leaving not a single man, woman or child alive." End quote. One final theory along a similar theme came from Harvard archaeologist Lawrence Steger, who claimed to have discovered evidence on Roanoke of mass cannibalism. At the time, the colony was facing the most extreme drought in 800 years, and they most certainly would have been in dire straits waiting for food. It is possible that the colonists could have turned to cannibalism in order to survive. And this very thing happened in the Jamestown tribe. However, as explained, there were no signs of a panic or a rushed exit of the island, which makes this possibility unlikely. The message left behind showed that they did in fact want to be found. Other local legends involve supernatural means. The CROATOANs believed in an evil spirit that could attach itself onto humans and even take the form of a reptile. Some believe that the colonists became possessed by the spirit and turned on one another. The CROATOANs also believed in witches at the time. Although the tribe didn't execute them regularly, they may have condemned the colonists to death if they felt they were too dangerous. There were legends of the witches stalking the North Carolina woods, and many locals are convinced that they were the victims of the witches. But the true definitive fate of the Roanoke lost colony, no matter how many centuries passed, remain a mystery, and we are all left seeking answers. It was on May the 5th, 1597. No, it's not.